Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. 7 o'clock. My name is Jim Hinderrocker. I'm a senior planner with the City of Fargo, and I want to welcome everybody to the third installment of our speaker forum dealing with the Fargo Comprehensive Plan update. Pretty excited about tonight's lecture. We actually have two folks with us this evening, and so we're getting a double dose. So I'm pretty excited about that. The fact that everybody came here on such a nice evening. It's very nice outside, so we won't talk about that anymore. One of the things that we didn't do last time that I kind of wanted to go through quickly, if we can, is the fact that we've got a lot of information on our website, the Go2030. If you take a look at the banners behind me, in addition to this room, we were actually running this live, and I want to say hi to everybody out there in the city of Fargo. But we do have an awful lot of information about the Fargo Comprehensive Plan, what it is, how to get involved, and it's real simple. It's just go2030.net. Type that in, www.go2030.net, and this is the web page that actually comes up, and this is what you'll be looking at. On the top, there's a couple of buttons that you can click, learn a little more about it, how to get involved, and then there's a contact that actually you can send me an email. But really where we want you to go is under the Get Involved. If you click on that, you can learn a little more, but if it goes down to the Go2030townhall.com, and that takes you to this Mind Mixer website. And you can learn a lot more about the different topics that the city is actually putting together and working on in terms of some of the major elements that will probably be within the plan itself. So if there's something like you want to talk about flood mitigation, you can post comments and ideas about that. If you want to talk about transportation or economic development, energy, there's lots of different areas that you can go on this website. I'm guessing everybody in this room has been on this site and posted, and I thank you for that, and hopefully we can continue to encourage that activity. Another announcement on June 23rd, Thursday, June 23rd at 7 o'clock here at the Civic Center in the Centennial Hall, we'll be holding our first public meeting. And with that, I really want to give a nice welcome to Dr. Kevin McCaul, who is the Dean of Science and Mathematics at NDSU, and also Dr. Allan Ashworth, who is a social psychology and climate professor at NDSU as well. Let's give them a nice warm clap. Come on up. Dr. Ashworth first.
I'll correct it.
Or we can, if you want to talk into this one too, that's fine too. Let's get your PowerPoint back up.
Maybe you can just hear me from here. Is that?
Well, you've got the recording.
Since we're recording, yeah, if you want to use that one. And then we've got the handheld here too.
Okay. So, well, thank you very much for this invitation to come along and talk about climate change. Kevin and I, neither one of us are scientists with a real research specialty in issues of global warming, but both of us have a deep interest in the topic of global warming in here. I come to it as a geologist, more from the physical sciences. Kevin comes to it as a psychologist, more from the social sciences. So we've sort of combined these efforts together, and recently, this will probably be about the third or fourth presentation that we've made together. This one is a little different to me in that it's looking at a city plan into the future, and so we tried to at least tweak part of this talk so that it would look at aspects that are more regional to Fargo in here. But at least we thought we'd start with some general points to be made about this whole issue of global warming, I should say, general warming. First of all, this slide that's up on the screen then is a global population. And you can see then, as of today, global population is very nearly 7 billion people. Now, if you look on that curve, towards the bottom of that curve, there's a number there that's 2,404,000,000 people. That number of population on Earth then was the year that I was born, okay? And you can see that today the number is near 7 billion. So in the time that I've been on Earth in here, then the population then has tripled in size, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about that. Now, as we think about Fargo in the year 2030, then in here, world population, you can see down there, is going to be over 8 billion. Now, in terms of an increase, then that represents something, just rounding off an increase then in here. That represents, on Earth then, 20% more people on Earth using resources of Earth. So whatever happens in here, we don't expect growth values like that probably in Fargo or this region particularly, but it will have a ripple effect on us. The world will be very different in the year 2030 than it is today. And the use of resources, including then fossil fuels and things like that, are clearly going to have an impact on that Earth of the future. So I think that this curve then is fundamentally important. I think at this point I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, and Kevin.
Thanks, Alan. A general point that Alan's making is that we live in a global community, and we all know that, but global effects have local effects. And so you're going to see some examples of that later on as we move from global climate to regional to local sorts of examples. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit. As Alan mentioned, I'm a social psychologist, and one of the things that we deal with are beliefs. What do people believe about climate change? And it turns out that the issue's a lot more complex than one might think. And in fact, when you ask that question, what do people believe about climate change, you're actually asking about a lot of different questions. And I'll just show you a few examples of that. Probably the simplest one is the Earth warming? Alan and I gave this talk about a month ago to several hundred people from across the state of North Dakota. And we did it as a different talk, in part because we knew that we'd get a really interesting split in the extent to which people held this belief or not, and some of the others that I'll show you in a minute. But just for the heck of it, how many of you believe the Earth is warming? Okay, very good. A couple of people maybe not so sure. It turns out that when you survey people across the United States and ask them that question, 90% agree that the Earth is warming. So the sort of consensus we saw here actually fits very neatly with that. There's a second question, however, a little bit different belief, and that's when you ask people, are we causing, that is, are human activities causing the Earth to warm? How many of you believe that to be the case? Still a majority, although there's a couple more of you that are going, I'm not so sure. And in fact, when you measure the U.S. population and ask this question, there's still a majority of individuals who believe that we're causing the Earth to warm, but it's a bare majority of individuals. So it's in that 55% range. You get a nice shift from is the Earth warming to are we causing it to warm? And there are other questions that you can ask as well. So I actually study health behavior, and one of the things that I've looked at over time is the extent to which people engage in health protective behaviors such as mammography screening. So I study worry. And so the question I'm interested in some ways in this particular context is, so suppose we are causing the Earth to warm. Should we worry about it? And I won't ask you to respond to that one, but that's an interesting question as well. One of the things that we discover is that there's some interesting group differences in these sorts of beliefs, and especially when you get to this last question, which is also very important. So if we are causing the Earth to warm, and if we're worrying about it, should we do anything about it? And of course, that's the question that's going to be particularly important for Fargo in the year 2030, or as we get to that point. Should we be thinking now about doing anything for self-protection sorts of purposes as we approach the year 2030? And I just mentioned at the bottom here, or list some of the polls that we draw some of these data from. One of the differences that I usually talk about, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it this evening, is there's an incredibly strong political difference in terms of whether people believe that we're causing the Earth to warm or whether we ought to do anything about it. In fact, the difference between Democrats and Republicans on this particular issue is just as large, if not larger, than the beliefs they hold about abortion and the differences between Democrats and Republicans. The point being, it's a big difference. And in fact, a majority of the U.S. House of Representatives do not believe that we're causing the warming that's occurring on Earth. Well, that has important implications in terms of those latter two questions. Should we worry about it, and are we going to do anything about it if you don't hold the belief to begin with that we're causing the problem? So one of the things that we often talk about is, why might those belief differences occur? Why should we have beliefs between Republicans and Democrats, or between a lot of other groups that differ on this particular issue? And there's a variety of reasons. One that's sort of fun to talk about is that one. And in fact, the person who first promulgated a lot of these ideas in the sense of moving from the science to a big public relations presentation was Al Gore. And a lot of people can't get past that. You know what Al's political persuasion is, and I think that that continues to drive some of that belief differences. But I think there's another more important reason, and that has to do with self-interest. Doing something about climate change has costs and benefits for different groups. Imagine coal producers versus wind turbine producers. And here I want to make an important point, and that is that our beliefs often follow what we want to believe. It doesn't always follow data or science. It often follows what we want to believe. So, coal producers versus wind turbine producers, I suspect different. I don't have the data. We do know, interestingly enough, that there are different science differences, and the biggest one is between earth scientists versus petroleum geologists. Earth scientists are in the range of 90% believing that we're causing the problem, and that's true of many different sciences. But look at what happens when you ask petroleum geologists whether we're a part of the problem. Well, they have obvious self-interest in this game, and the number who believe that we're causing the problem drops fairly dramatically. Long-haul truckers versus city commuters. This is an important point that actually Mike Williams made when we gave this talk a while back, and that's that in general, people are willing to do something about climate change if you ask them, especially if they think that whatever we need to do will not harm their self-interest, will not cost them their jobs, will not cost them. So, well, I think it's important for anyone who's watching this presentation or who's thinking about that issue to ask yourself, how do you explain your own beliefs? Wherever you come down on this issue, why do you hold that particular belief? And, even more importantly, what would it take to change your mind about the threat of global warming? Either way, if you believe it's important, what would it take to switch you? And if you don't believe it's a problem, what would it take to switch you? Now, let me tell you a few things about Allan Ashworth. He's one of the most prominent professors on the NDSU campus. He's a university distinguished professor, one of only 9 in that role. He is internationally known. He has a glacier in Antarctica named for him. He's traveled numerous times through his support through the National Science Foundation to study climate change. He told you at the beginning this isn't his sole interest, and it's not, but he is an expert in this area. And what he's going to do now is show you some of the data. So if you don't mind, please join me in welcoming Allan Ashworth.
So, a few general things. I think we're familiar with this temperature curve in here. John Wheeler is part of our audience, and John knows this curve probably a lot better than I do. He knows all the problems that exist with this particular curve, or a lot of them at any rate. So there are lots of caveats then when we look at this particular curve. But what it sort of portrays in here then is that there's this gradual drift upwards in global temperatures through time. And the interesting thing in here is that you can take major climate groups in the UK, you can take major climate groups in the United States. They will use somewhat different methodologies, they will use somewhat different data sets to get at the curve, but the curves end up looking remarkably similar to one another.